Alright, so a few weeks ago I saw Drive My Car, and I remember seeing quite a few requests for me to cover it. And after seeing this movie, I was like, okay, I completely understand why. This movie is dense, but also extremely subtle and slow, very much like Power of the Dog. And since this movie is 3 hours long, I've decided to divide this video into 2 parts. So to break this movie down, we're going to use 3 themes, but today we're only going to cover theme number 1, Language of Love, where we'll discuss Yusuke reciting lines in his car, Yusuke's play compared to his life, Oto's infidelity, Oto's sex and writing ritual, the meaning of Oto's lamprey story, and Oto's death. Next week, I'm going to cover theme number 2 and theme number 3, where we'll discuss a million more things, including the ending of this movie. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and a comment. It helps so much. And if you want to see more of these, please make sure to subscribe as well. Let's get started. Theme number 1, Language of Love. The most frequent kind of scene we get in this movie is where Yusuke is driving his car, reciting the lines from his play. At first, it just seems like Yusuke is rehearsing his lines as an actor and gaining familiarity with the dialogue as a stage director. But throughout the film, we realize that there is so much more purpose to why Yusuke recites his dialogue in his car so much. Driving is a ritual of introspection for Yusuke. He uses the time in his car to reflect on his life. The reason we know this is because every line in his play that he recites in his car relates to his past, his current life, and specific events in the film. The script for Yusuke's play is a real play called Uncle Vanya, written by Anton Chekhov in 1898. I won't go into the plot of the play because the story structure is so purposely unconventional and it would just make things very confusing in this video for no reason. But what's really important about this play is the sentiment of the play. This play includes a series of depressed and resentful, melancholic characters dwelling on the misfortunes of their lives. And throughout the play, these characters' lives get tangled into each other through lies, heartbreak, jealousy, and conflict. It's just a very unhappy story with really cynical characters. Vanya is the main character who is sad and bitter and dwells heavily on how he could have been more successful. He's also obsessed with a woman named Yelena, who doesn't love him back. Vanya is also very jealous of an egotistical yet insecure man named Serebrakov, who is successful and married to Yelena. So very clearly, these characters and events in the play tie in loosely with the characters and events in the movie. Vanya would be Yusuke, Yelena would be Oto, and Serebrakov would be Koshi. That's how I see it. But I also think it's very important to remember, as you can see, that not everything in the play ties in exactly and perfectly with the movie. It's more the sentiment of the play and the emotions of the characters that are tightly connected with the film. So when we hear Yusuke reciting these sad and tragic lines in his car from the play, he's actually allowing himself to vent in these moments of solitude about his truest and darkest feelings in real life. He does feel miserable, regretful, disconnected, and directionless. And this is why his driving with his tapes is so cathartic for him. An example I want to discuss is Yusuke's relationship with his wife. Yusuke recites lines like, "She is faithful, but her fidelity is a lie," and "A woman is in love with 2 men at once." These lines indicate Yusuke's perspective of Oto's infidelity as he questions whether she truly loved him and or loved someone else. But even though Oto is unfaithful, I strongly believe Oto does deeply love Yusuke. And here's my theory on why. In a gripping scene later in the film, Yusuke is opening up to Koshi about his marriage and his daughter, who passed away at 4 years old. Our daughter's death marked the end of our happy times. I believe when Yusuke's daughter died, Yusuke became less open about his feelings, which explains why his demeanor is always so emotionless throughout this film. And I feel like Oto created their sex and stories routine subconsciously for the two of them to maintain some sexual connection and share their artistic passions consistently. It was a new way for them to connect emotionally, since Yusuke has become so emotionally closed off since their daughter died. And I also feel like Yusuke's continuous emotional distance actually made Oto's romantic love for him slowly fade away. But Oto still cared for Yusuke and didn't want to drive his depression further, and she still deeply loved him as a person, so she stayed with him. They were the only two that each of them had that understood each other's pain. And the only reason she cheats on Yusuke is to fulfill fulfill the need for a fresh and exciting sexual romantic relationship. This is a need for Otto that Yusuke has never been able to fulfill since their daughter died. He's too broken. You can see his disconnection and feeling of obligation during his sex scenes with Otto. And I feel like the Lamprey story introduced at the beginning of the film was her way of expressing her truest feelings about a relationship and infidelity with Yusuke. The entire Lamprey story to me was like one big confession from Otto, but communicated in code. In the story, a teenage girl is infatuated with a boy at school and sneaks into the boy's house regularly. Every time, she always leaves something of hers in his room and takes something of his. And one key point to this story is she is always resisting the urge to masturbate in his room. It's also mentioned that she's a well-behaved girl who is good to her family and friends. However, she does eventually surrender to the urge of masturbation and does so on his bed. And at the same time, a thief enters the house and the girl kills him before he can do anything harmful. As said before, to me, this entire story is Otto's confession. It's one big metaphor. Symbolically, the teenage girl is Otto, the boy at school is the other men that Otto is interested in, and the thief is Yusuke. Just like the well-behaved teenage girl doing what she knows she shouldn't and surrendering to masturbation, Otto is also a good person trying to adhere to her morals but surrenders to the temptation of sleeping with other men. The thief breaking in reflects Yusuke's suspicion and knowledge of what's going on in the house. This is visually indicated as we see Yusuke enter the house when he isn't expected and actually catches Otto in the act. And the teenage girl killing the thief who broke in reflects Otto's guilt for hurting Yusuke even further and killing any romantic spirit left between them in their marriage. Also, in the story, after the dead thief's body is left in the house, no one reacts to the situation, and the girl screams into the new security camera of the house that she broke in and she killed the thief, but we never find out if anyone actually hears her. I totally think the ending of the story reflects Otto desperately trying to build the courage to confess for what she has done to Yusuke, but Yusuke never really hearing her and never wanting to hear her because he knows what the answer is. He can't face that reality. This is why she asks him to talk when he gets back from work. She is finally going to confess. But Yusuke purposely comes home as late as possible, which he admits. Otto also prefaces this story with the teenage girl being a lamprey in her past life. Otto says the girl didn't leech off of other fish. She just swayed at the bottom of the river and died for a reason she doesn't know. To me, this preface to the story indicates how Otto never tried to deeply connect with other men or take from them in any way. Out of empathy and love for her husband, she remained floating in a suffering marriage with Yusuke. She always knew she was the only thing he had. She even mentions that the bottom of the ocean for the lamprey was just like her moments with Yusuke. And as said before, she mentions that the lamprey died for a reason she doesn't know. This, of course, reflects Otto's own death. Otto died from a cerebral hemorrhage, but we don't know why this happened. After the death of their daughter, Yusuke's language of love just seems to have shifted into considerate acts of service, rather than strong expressions of affection. But Otto needs affection from her lover, which is why she seeks it elsewhere and finds it in infidelity. And Otto's language of love, through symbolic stories, was purposely ignored by Yusuke, claiming he didn't remember her symbolic confessional lamprey story from the night before when we see him looking up lampreys the next day. He's in denial. And I feel like this whole love language theme is symbolized beautifully by how Yusuke's play is performed in multiple languages at once. This detail symbolizes that expressions of the truest emotions are communicated in different ways depending on the nature and experiences of each individual. Some of the most fantastic scenes come from Liuna, who only speaks in sign language, but captures many of the most emotionally resonant moments in the film and the play. Yusuke was moved by her audition because her character was speaking to Vanya, who Yusuke sees himself in. So in this scene, even though she is acting, it's like she was speaking directly to Yusuke about his deepest and most hidden feelings, ones that he only reveals in his car by himself. It was an ongoing misinterpretation of differing languages of love that tragically ended Otto and Yusuke's happiness, romance, and lives with one another. Alright, that's part 1, but the analysis isn't finished. Part 2 is next week, where we'll talk about the ending of the film and so many more fascinating details. Subscribe for weekly videos, and thank you so much for watching. See you soon.